Hi everyone, it's Plasky P coming in from Melbourne, Australia. And let me tell you, we've got Nigel Pearce here, Beatle historian, Beatle collector, and we love the Beatles. But not only that, now we got a great author with a fantastic book, right? Once I found out about the book, Nancy, it just got my attention straight away. And this is Nancy King, and she wrote a fantastic book called Stay Calm and Meet the Beatles. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. Now, if you can just tell everybody about the book and how long it took to write, and just tell us a couple of stories about your fantastic experiences, let's say with Clyde and Jeremy, with the three guys that were in that band, the British
zombies,
one.
Zombies. Oh, yes, the Zombies. And they're still going strong, by the way. They just released a CD back in March. They're still recording. They're still touring. They were just booked in Poland. They're going to Poland in June. And it's two of the original Zombies, Colin Blunstone, the lead singer, and Rod Argent, who wrote all of their big hits. And they're still going out as a band. But anyway, my book actually starts when I was 16 years old. Like most teenagers my age, I became totally infatuated with the Beatles once they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. And when they came over to the United States for their very first major tour in the summer of 1964, I just wanted to see them so badly, but I was living in North Dakota. And I don't know if you are familiar with North Dakota, but it's a very small state. The largest city is like, 70,000 people. So my mother said, if you can get tickets to any concert, I will take you wherever I need to take you. So we were able to get tickets in Vancouver, British Columbia. And so we planned a trip out to the West Coast. It was like going halfway across the continent to see them. And my mother had friends who lived in Seattle, Washington. And they told her that the Beatles were going to be in Seattle the night before they were going to be in Vancouver. So, and they were going to be staying at the Edgewater Inn Hotel. So my mother books a room for us at the Edgewater Inn Hotel. And we arrived the day before the Beatles get there. And to make a long story short, once the Beatles arrived in the hotel, I became acquainted with a journalist who was traveling with them on tour. He was actually with the Liverpool Echo, and his name was George Harrison, but he was no relation to the Beatle George. But he was one of the first columnists to start writing about the Beatles during their days at the Cavern Club. Anyway, we struck up this friendship because, first of all, he was very impressed that my mother had driven us all the way across the country so I could see the Beatles. And he eventually arranged with Brian Epstein for me to go to their hospitality suite. And I spent close to an hour with the Beatles. It was just the Beatles, Brian Epstein, George Harrison, the columnist, and myself, just sitting around chatting. For a 16-year-old, this was really, really special. So that's basically how I got the idea for the book, because from there, once I got back to my small town in North Dakota, I was like the local celebrity because having met the Beatles. So the local radio stations got in touch with me. They gave me a program geared toward teenagers on British groups. And so it was from there that during the summer of 1965, when a lot of the British invasion groups were coming over to America, I was able to travel around the country, and I interviewed Herman's Hermits, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Tom Jones, the Dave Clark Five, all of these groups that were coming over. So it was a pretty amazing summer. And so that's how my book starts, basically. And then it takes me through the next 6 decades. of how I eventually reconnect with a lot of these rock stars that I had interviewed 60 years ago, because a lot of them are still touring. And so that's basically the gist of the book. Do you have any
That-
questions?
That's amazing. Go, Nigel.
Yes, well, thank you, Nancy. It's a very, very good expose. And as Plastic has told you, I am a Beatles historian and large collector. So maybe you and I should get together and do something else, because I think there's something that we can do. What about the Holly? What about the Hollies?
The Hollies, that's interesting. I just saw Tony Hicks on the Flower Power cruise. He is now traveling as the Hollies. Usually a group goes out now, and we've already lost a lot of members of the groups, but as long as there's one or two of the originals, they go out with the name. And I never, during the 60s, I never had the opportunity to meet the Hollies, but I did like them very much.
Now, I just want to say,
No.
Graham Nash is actually touring Melbourne now as we speak. He's got a concert coming up. Yep, Graham Nash. And now, Nancy, I just want to ask you, right, two quick questions.
Okay.
Right? A good friend of the show is Jeremy Clyde. We love the guy. He's fantastic. We've interviewed him, and you apparently drove Clyde and Jeremy, right?
Well, what happened again? Chad and Jeremy were traveling with,
Chad and Jeremy.
it was like a Dick Clark Caravanastar, where it was a bus tour. There were probably 20 different acts on the bus. And Chad and Jeremy decided they didn't want to take the bus on, going from city to city. And so they would fly instead of ride the bus. And so they came to Fargo, North Dakota, of all places. And I was at the radio station, and they got a call and they said, oh, Chad and Jeremy need to be picked up at the airport. Can you girls go and pick them up? Well, here you got 17-year-olds who had just gotten their driver's license being sent out to the airport to pick up these rock stars, which we did. And they were also with Jimmy Gauricio, who was their, I believe, bass player at the time. And he wrote the song Distant Shores. And he wasn't feeling well. So we ended up driving him to the emergency room, and he got some antibiotics, and he was able to perform that night. But it was a real adventure for us. And yet I saw Chad and Jeremy maybe 50 years later, and I related the experience to them. And where it's always been such a great story for me, they had absolutely no recollection to it happening. But it just goes to show you that, for something that's so important for your fans and your followers, it's just another day in their life. But it was still very, very special.
I've got to ask you about the accents. It's very important. I mean, going to meet, as I said, Jeremy and Chad, I'm just saying, just hearing the accents in 64 must have been such a buzz. And with the Beatles, as I said, to have an hour conversation with them, can you just tell me what you actually spoke to them about? Like, that's really mind-boggling to me.
Well, and not only did I meet them, but I had a tape recorder. So I have tape recordings of interviews with Tom Jones and Gordon of Peter and Gordon. And I've got a fabulous tape of the Zombies, because they were again on a Dick Clark Caravan of Stars. And so we drove in, it was in North Dakota of all places. And so after school, two of my girlfriends and I drove there with my tape recorder to get some interviews, because they were the only British group on this Dick Clark Caravan of Stars. And my radio program was called British Pop Shop. So here was a chance for me to get some interviews with bona fide British groups. So we got there and we saw Paul Atkinson, who was their lead guitar player, just walking around the hotel parking lot. So we called him over to the car. He got in the car and I did the interview in the car. And then two more of the zombies, Chris White, who is also one of the co-writers for the zombies. He wrote Hold Your Head Up, Woman, and half the songs on their Odyssey and Oracle album. But two more zombies came in the car. So there were six of us. And their bus pulls off to go to the performance. And we end up driving them to the Armory for their show. And while we're sitting there waiting to go in, do you remember Del Shannon?
Of course.
He was okay, well, he comes riding by on a bicycle and he stops by the car because he sees the zombies are inside. And so they're kibitzing back and forth. And I have all of this on tape, where they're saying, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just riding me bike. And my friend says, oh, you did a great job on the show Shindig. And Chris says, oh, what were you doing on the show Shindig? And he said, oh, I was a stagehand. So it was just kind of a fun, carefree conversation that we had with them. But then the real kicker was that after we dropped the zombies off for their show, we just packed up the tape recorder and we drove back to Grand Forks, which is our hometown, because I had a geometry exam the next day. And so we never stayed for this fabulous performance, but we got some great interviews for the show. But it was one of the regrets that I have, that we didn't stay around and actually go to the show, because it was, it was another thing where it was the Shangri-Las, Jimmy and the Executives. I mean, there were huge stars on board at the time. So, but we were just, teenagers.
Nigel.
Yes.
Very lucky ones indeed. And obviously you've got a lifetime of experiences and a whole bag full of memories. And I think that, these tape recordings that you've got, I think if possible, we'd love to hear them, because it's a slice of social history that can never ever be repeated. So if we can do something, I would be very pleased to, because coming a little further with yourself, I actually had 2 hours with Jeremy on my radio show.
Oh, did you?
After doing the show with Plastic. And we had a great 2 hours talking about various incidences in America, including being on Batman and the incident at Los Angeles with the hotel and the wedding and everything else. We had a great time. So, and I've actually got another show to do with him in a couple of months' time. So it does go round in circles, sometimes ever decreasing circles. So if we can possibly do something with you to hear some of this stuff, it's gold dust. It's real social history gold dust.
Oh, it is. And there was one interview that I did with Gordon Waller. And I remember asking him 60 years ago, what are you going to do when this is all over? And he was expecting it to, that it was only going to last 2 or 3 years. Well, 50 years later, I saw him perform with Peter, and I played the interview for him. And it was just so interesting that, way back in 1965, he didn't think he was going to be performing in 2005, and that's what's just it's so interesting about the whole British invasion, is that people still love to go hear their music, because it was just, it was the soundtrack of our lives as teenagers.
Exactly. Now, Nancy, I've got to hone in on this if I can, all right? You met the Beatles for an hour, and to me, that is unbelievable at that time. So if you can please tell us that story of what it was like. You went in there, you met the Beatles, then tell us about the conversations you had with each Beatle or what actually happened, because this is like getting into the inner sanctum of the Beatles, and new generations of fans have got no idea what it must have been to be in the eye of the hurricane and actually get to meet them at that point of their first US tour.
Well, and first of all, what you have to keep in mind is that when I met this columnist for the Liverpool Echo, it was never in my mind for, to say to him, oh, can you get me in to meet the Beatles? It was just one of those things that he had invited a whole group, by this time at the hotel, there were a lot of adults, and we were all kind of congregating around in the evening. The Beatles were at their performance, and the columnist didn't go to all of the shows. He would just wait and have Brian Epstein call him and then give him the information of what happened. And that's how he'd write his column. So he had invited this whole group of us, there were probably 10 or 12, mainly adults, up to his room because he was in the process of writing a book about the Beatles. So he had personal photographs that he had taken. He even had some of their schoolwork. I remember him showing me Paul McCartney's analysis of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales that he had done in high school, and it said James P. McCartney was written on it. And so while we were in with him, the phone rang, and it was Brian Epstein calling him to report on the performance. And we were hearing just one end of the conversation. And when it was starting to wind down, he said, I have a 16-year-old girl here, and I was wondering if she could come down and meet the boys. Well, I couldn't hear what he was saying, but, it was probably something like, oh, they just got back from the performance. They had to be smuggled back to the hotel in an ambulance. Because he and the columnist said, well, it'll only be one, and it'll just be for a little while. And he hung up the phone. He looked at me and he said, you're in. And at that point, it was like, oh my goodness. So we went down, and there was a security officer sitting outside their room. He knocked on the door. Brian answered it, and Paul was standing right behind him. They invited me in. So mainly I started talking to Paul. George was on a couch, just sort of relaxing. So he took me over. And so for a while, I was just chatting with George and Paul. Meanwhile, John was on the other side of the room. He was sitting in the chair. He had sunglasses on and that hat that he always wore. And he was reading a room service menu. And Ringo was in another room taking a shower. So initially, I spent most of the time talking with George and Paul, asking them about their movie. I remember at one point, Paul offered me a cigarette, which I turned down. And then eventually, they took me over and introduced me to John. And the one thing that stands out in my mind, when Paul introduced me and said, oh, she's from North Dakota, John said, oh, the Black Hills of the Dakotas. And at the time, I was just kind of taken aback because I thought, whoa, he's heard where I'm from, because North Dakota isn't one of the great big famous states in the United States. It's kind of, it's a geographical center of North America, but it's not like California or New York. So chatted with him for a while, and then pretty soon Ringo came out and he was kind of rubbing his hair with a towel. And so I went over to him, and of course he showed me, I asked him about his rings. What else are you going to ask Ringo? And he explained where he'd gotten each one. And then we were all kind of sitting around. It was a bar area that they had set up there. And they were talking about the upcoming dates. And at that time, there had been a rumor. There was this psychic named Jean Dixon, who was very famous. And she had predicted that their plane was going to crash on the way to their Indianapolis concert. So there was a conversation going on about, well, do we take this seriously? Should we, take a train? Should we think of other combinations, And I just remember John saying, well, when your time comes, there's really nothing you can do. And they ended up just, ignoring and everything obviously turned out okay, as they made it to the Indianapolis concert on on time, and so it all worked out. So that was basically, you know, a lot of it, they were discussing the tour and the logistics for the next you know, few days, and because they were going on to Vancouver the next night. So it was all very casual. And I happened, you know, back in those days, we didn't have cameras, so I didn't get any pictures. But I had just seen the movie A Hard Day's Night a few days before, and I had purchased a copy of A Hard Day's Night, the paperback book, and I just happened to have it in my purse. And so I got them all to autograph, and that's actually the book that I'm holding here in the cover. And on the inside of the book, you can actually still read the autographs. It says at the top, "Lots of love, George Harrison. Love from Paul McCartney, XXX. John Lennon, XXX. Ringo just wrote his name." And then on the inside cover, it's a little bit faded now, but it says, "To Nancy, best wishes, Brian Epstein."
Nancy,
So,
I'll just get you to show us the front of the book and then just show us those pages if you can.
should I what?
Yeah, that's the book.
Yes.
Right? And I'm saying your original book, it's somewhere else, yeah? But you've got all those details and signatures in your book, yeah?
Yes, yes, I do. You can, I'm trying to find the one page.
Yeah.
Because what was really interesting for years, I just kept this book in, you know, a dresser drawer. And I live in Florida, and we started to get a lot of hurricanes in Florida. So one time my mom was visiting, and I said, you know, I really should start protecting this book.
Yeah.
North Dakota is the safest place I know. Would you take it out and put it in your safe deposit box? Which she did. Well, 4 months later, the flood of the century hits Grand Forks, North Dakota. I mean, the entire town has to be evacuated. I'm watching CNN. They're going down Main Street. I see a building with flames coming out of the roof, and it's the First National Bank where there's my book. And at that point, I just resign myself to the fact that it's gone, you know, and I'm okay with it because people are losing their homes. I mean, the town was just totally destroyed. But a few weeks later, my mom called and she said, well, the bank had, you know, scheduling appointments where you could go in. And it turns out that the book, her box was like 3 rows below the water line, but I had put it in a fireproof bag and it protected it. So here in the book is where you can see it's a little bit waterlogged, but at the top you can still very clearly see "Lots of love, George Harrison." So I still have, you know, the book survived the flood of the century. You know? But so it's very special. But
that's great. Nigel.
Yes.
Yes, I can say truthfully that in 1976, Nancy, I met George Harrison.
Oh.
I was very fortunate to go to Friar Park, and I met him at his home.
Oh my.
And also, whilst I was there, but not known to me at the time, the duo Splinter were staying there recording their first album. And George gave me a signed photograph of himself.
Oh my.
He's put my name on it, "To Nigel, best wishes, George Harrison." And then about a month later, I got up to Apple, and he left me a present in Apple, which I picked up. And if you've seen the film, I've been up to the roof, I've been on the basement studios. I went all through the building, which was a wreck by then because they were leaving it. So I have met George Harrison, and I've got his autograph, and I'm very pleased to have done that. So although I haven't met the whole 4, and you have a unique experience, you have, how can I put it? The 60s not only indelibleized in your heart, you've got them enshrined in memory for fans to see. And I think that is so fortunate for all the fans, because I know what it's like, having written a book myself, or a couple of books. So I know what you go through. And all I say is congratulations. You have been very fortunate. and you've given us a very important part of social history, which wasn't relevant then because nobody knew how long they would last. So here we are 60 years later. We've just had a new record, a new #1 from the Beatles. And there is more stuff to come, I can tell you. So yes, we are in a unique club. So congratulations.
Yeah, and also with the 60th anniversary, I'm just saying that's fantastic too. But you know what fascinates me now, right? Come on, let's hear a Dave Clark 5 story, okay? I've got to get that in the interview.
Okay. I mean, before I go, before I go any further, I just have to say that it was just such a kind thing that George Harrison, the columnist, did for me, because it changed my life. He didn't have to do that, and I never expected it. But it was just such a kind thing that he did. And again, from there, that's how I was able to go on and meet all of these other groups. So yes, and of course, with the Dave Clark 5, I attended their press conference, and then afterwards I was chatting with Mike, and we ended up going out after a performance. And then for a couple of years when they'd come back, we would get together. So, but the Dave Clark 5 were such a talented group, and they were always a little bit overshadowed by the Beatles. And of course, they after they broke up, it was so hard to really see them or keep in touch, because Dave kept such a tight rope on them and all of their songs and their videos. So, and then of course, Mike Smith eventually in the early 2000s, he started touring again with a group called Mike Smith's Rock Engine. And then he had the tragic accident and ending up passing away much too soon. So
I know. Now I want to say, when you look back at the eye of the hurricane, to me your story is unique, okay? Because in 1964, you got to understand, everybody, every female wanted to meet the Beatles, and for that to actually eventuate for yourself, I mean, the chances of that is like winning a lotto. There's no question in my mind. To be able to meet up with the Beatles personally is like, just that alone is mind-blowing. But then to continue the relationship with these new bands that are coming from the British invasion across to the US, to me, that's the other fascinating part. So, I mean, it doesn't really get bigger than that, does it, Nigel?
It doesn't at all. And as I say, you've had a unique position and a unique opportunity to view the hysteria from within. And therefore, like the eye of the storm, because you are able to talk at a relaxed pace in a convivial atmosphere, you've probably learnt far more than just being a screaming fan from the outside, pressed up against a window or pressed up against a fence. So you saw the other side of all these groups and all these artists. And I think that, again, is invaluable, because, you see the film now, and the Beatles, I'll say this, and, they outshone everybody. It just wasn't the Dave Clark 5. They outshone the Stones. They outshone everybody. And the reason they did that is the fact that they're still here with us today, 60 years later. But you've seen the eye of the storm, and you've got something that is so unique, something that is so, I want to do that, or so revered. Guard it and treasure it.
Now, I just want to say, we want to thank you so much, Nancy, for being on the show. We want everybody to go out and get your book, Stay Calm and Meet the Beatles. Go out there on the internet. Where can they get your book from? Obviously, Amazon, and where else?
Well, so far it's only Amazon. I just had it published in January, so I haven't had a chance to get out there and do a lot of promotion on it. But one thing I do want to say, the reason I called it Stay Calm and Meet the Beatles, I was never a screaming fan. You know, and that's the better approach, is to just stay calm, be just a normal person, be articulate, and it really works a lot better than trying to hide in a laundry basket or something, or hide in an elevator trying to see them. So
that's
yeah.
fantastic. I just want to say, Nigel, that was a fantastic. You summed it up. Fantastic.
You really did, Nigel, and thank you for that. Yeah. I actually started writing the book 10 years ago for the 50th anniversary. Because anytime I tell the story, people would say, you really should write a book. But then I thought, well, nobody's going to be interested. I'm not a Kardashian. I'm not famous. Why would they want to find this interesting? But basically, I'm like all of these people out there that go to the concerts. I was just another fan sitting there watching the show, but I got very, very lucky.
Nigel, before we wrap, just go for it.
Now, you were talking about Peter and Gordon.
Yes.
Did you know, Nancy, that in 1966 in England, the British press were starting to get very unkind to both the Beatles and the record buying public? Because somebody put into there that if the Beatles wrote a song about scratching their noses and released it, the record buying public would buy it in droves and put it up the charts. So Paul McCartney, and Plastic knows this because I've already told him, Paul McCartney said to Peter and Gordon, I'll write a song, I'll give it to you to sing, will you sing it? But we'll put it out as a pseudonym, so that it isn't a
just
Paul
say
McCartney
Bernard
song.
Webb. That was the pseudonym.
That's right.
There
He
you go.
He called himself Bernard Webb. The song was recorded, Nancy, and it was released. But what I've actually got the acetate of Peter and Gordon recording that song for the very first time. And on drums is Paul McCartney, and he's also doing harmony vocals.
What a collector's item.
All right, I
So
just want to
I'm very
say to
pleased
everyone out there, we thank you so much. Keep watching the Plastic EP show. Let me tell you, it's stories like this that make my day, that make my year, just to bring it to all these new first generation of Beatle fans. And this will live on forever. And as I said, I want to congratulate you on the book, Nancy. You both do. Stay calm and meet the Beatles. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this.
Before we go, Nancy,
yes,
I'd like you to come onto my radio show in the UK, and we can talk about this. Now, Plastic's got your email. If you can let Plastic have it and he can pass it to me, I'd love you to be a guest on UK radio.
Oh, I think that would
be like taking America back to Britain via the Beatles.
There we
Thank
go.
you.